pressed, green lights on. It is live. I think we're in for another Code Zone. It's episode 48. Ooh, 48 Code Zones. I mean, this is the third of season 2, I suppose. And in today's episode, I'm going to be, I'll talk you through some of the changes I've made. I've actually made quite a few. And I get to see Magetsub's in the chat. Good old Magetsub, he's kind of there, I suppose. That's good. And Infinite Coder, hello. And Alter Ego, hello. So, what's changed? Well, not much, but I've had a bit of a thought about how we're going to start structuring things. And I'll run it to start, and we can see what the most significant differences are. It's starting to look a bit like an actual application. I can't remember where we left it in the last episode, but we were working on an asset viewer. But I did show sort of loading images and things, didn't I? Yes, I did. Really, what I've been working on is the really boring stuff. So this is a great way to start a new stream, isn't it? And by boring stuff, I mean the sort of nuts and bolts of the application. And we've got Londo. I think I know you as a certain Mr. Somebody Else. Hello. And Channel Mouse, hello. Nanoic, hello, and there we go, Magetsub. Good evening. Well, it's good to see you again, Londo. I'm pleased that you're still alive. So, Sigo Nitori, yes. Yes, I do, I know. Really, what I mean is boring stuff, boilerplate stuff. I've been doing the things that you've got to do just to get them. I want to get them out of the way so they're not really in future streams. Things like opening and saving of the workspace. And we'll have a look at these things. I've got some test workspaces here. Things like this. Do you want to save this workspace? No, I don't want to save it before continuing. Here's one I've already made. I've got things, usability things, such as like it's loading things. So you want progress bars and dialogues whilst it's thinking about how to do all of that. So we'll load up all of these assets. There it is in the asset manager. This is what we looked at in the last episode. I've added things to the ability to move assets up and down in this ranking, and adding and removing them now all works. And it's the fiddly stuff of making sure it works without crashing all over the place. You don't want to move it past the top, move it past the bottom. You don't want to remove things that aren't there. So we don't need to look at how the asset manager works anymore, because I think we did all of that last week. But clearly we can now serialize things. So we are actually starting to save information. And if I open the workspace here, I've got a tree of things that's going to exist in the warehouse, in the workspace. This isn't, you're going to see stuff appearing in the log messages. They're not accurate. I'm really just using this in lieu of not having any buttons to press. But as I single click things, you can see I'm generating log messages. That was a way for me to sort of see that the differentiation of things in the workspace tree was working. Getting a bit of flickering here on the output. And if I double click things, we start causing things to load and happen. So if I double click on global assets, I can open another viewer of our global assets. Now, it didn't have to load all the images this time because they're already loaded into the workspace. But you can see it's now it's working as you'd expect. Thank you, Londo. That's very kind of you. I always get thrown by. Hopefully you heard that one this time. I did try and play with the volumes after last time. I was told it wasn't quite working very well. We've got a few other people. Voxel, hello. Jelly, hello. We can hear. Yes, it is very loud. Gorbit, hello. See you later, Londo. Thank you very much. Good, I'm pleased. What I was getting to is that even though we've now got this second view, and we can remember, don't forget, this is a sort of a dynamic kind of environment. We can have two of these views up separately. We can look at things independently. It's not reloaded all of the resource. I will sort this flickering out. This is a terrible bug. It shouldn't be there. So good, that's kind of working. It's showing that my back-end manipulation of the graphics card, and it's all been tidied up after the horrible shaming you all gave me in the last episode about my project management and structuring. I did actually go back and review it. So there has actually been quite a lot of changes behind the scenes, and we'll talk through them. Finally, where I got up to was I'm going to have a property list down here. We'll talk about that in a minute when we look at the structure. And I generated a general purpose. I've forgotten how to launch it. Is it that one I click? If I double click on it, a general purpose asset selection dialog. So a bit like any of the open file, save file, message box things, just allows you to select an asset, click OK, and because lots of things are going to want an asset in the background. So you just click on that, it pops up a dialog, all the assets are there, ready to be explored and manipulated, and that's going to form the base of whatever. What the hell is that? Whatever we're doing next. Excellent. Good. Speedy, hello. Alex, hello. Good. Getting a few people here. I didn't push it. Sorry about the 8:30 start, although I think it's going to be 8:30 starts from now on. It just ties into my family life here at the moment. Bedtime is currently happening about 10 to 8, so 8:30 is better for me. Good. So, not much by way of changes on the front end, but lots of changes and things on the back end. So let's go and start having a look at. And yes, I can save and save as and all that stuff. I'm not going to demonstrate that; it's powerfully dull. So let's close that and have a look at some of the code that changed. Greg Inc. first time chat. Hello. Voxel, haven't been here in the past few streams. Is the editor the Stream project? Yes, it's a general purpose Swiss Army knife 2D editor. I've got lots of things that I like to redevelop in 2D, and I'm fed up of having to create editors every single time. So it's a bit like Tiled. It's going to have some vector art stuff in there as well. It's going to have some programming related tools in there, and I might even throw boring things in like text editors and hex editors. I just want it to be this sort of one universal tool, but it's also a way for me to sort of talk about GUI design and exploring some of the things in the background as well. I hope we'll be seeing some code. It's CodeZone. Have you learned nothing in 48 episodes? How much code have you actually seen being written? Right, so where to start, actually, because things did take... Now, I'd love to get the graphics tablet out, but it's died. Oh no! So sort of the thing that makes a one lone coder video is it's currently in need of some serious repair. I don't know what's happened. It has a little screen on it, a little LCD display, and that's just like random dots and lines. And even though the pen does work, it's upside down and spread across all of my monitors, so the driver has died or something. Anyway, I can't get it working now. I'll have to... I've only had it for... at least 13 years. So I'm going to have to. Maybe I got my money's worth out of it. Hey, Bixie, hello. Maybe we should kind of crowdfund it. No, I don't think that's going to be necessary. I reckon I can get this repaired. I don't know what's happened. I think there's been I think it's a software problem, but the software on my Windows computer is what talks to the screens on this thing, and it's just not doing it right. So I think hardware's fine. I just need to get stuck in. And I only realised it 10 minutes before I was about to come on air. Right, let's have a look. Firstly, let's go and have a look at the form builder. Let's just dazzle everybody. So this bottom item here that's selected, we'll start here. This is the dialog for selecting an asset. And you'll see it's actually very similar to the asset that we created as part of the asset manager. In fact, they're very, very similar indeed, and that's quite deliberate. So if I open up the asset manager, which is that one there, and I open up the selection dialog, the only difference between the two, if I open that one, you can see even the utilities are called the same thing. And that's because I literally just cut and paste straight out of my asset manager into this image asset selection dialog. And you think, well, surely there's opportunity for reuse there. There's so little code in this, it really wasn't worth the hassle. And there is one subtle difference. Firstly, the asset editor, this particular tool has all of this additional GUI in the bottom and the facility to implement what's going on with these buttons. So it is the GUI that is doing the moving up and the moving down. It is no longer the GUI that's doing the add and removing of resources. The background is doing that, and we'll follow that through in a moment. But other than that, it presents a similar user interface. Lots of things are going to want an asset. So I wanted to try and get some code done today where we'll start looking at the structure of the project and what the tiles are. We'll start with something very simple. And it occurred to me that in order to define a tile atlas, you need to first of all define the texture. And how would the user select that texture as the basis on the tile atlas? Well, they can use this image asset selection dialog. Just have a quick glance at the chat. So many new buttons. Yes, Alex. Yeah, end up banning everybody. Fluff is here. Thank you. Oh, hang on. What have we got here? Voxel. Thank you, Voxel. That's very kind of you. Asimov77. Nice to meet you. Greetings from Naples. Ooh, hello. Yeah, you already turned down my screen's brightness. That's a good call. Everything is light themed today. In contrast to, well, dark theme. There we go. Think of the logic on that for a moment. Yeah, sorry, Bixie. Voxel's here. Yeah, we've got to have some balance in the Twitch chat, I suppose. There hasn't been a huge amount of change. There's been some tidying up of things on the GUI, but the main editor window, this window, I have actually fleshed out this menu bar. And if you didn't know, in Form Builder, you can actually construct menus completely. You don't have to do any coding for them at all. And a menu is a menu bar. So this is the menu. This is the menu itself. And on the menu, you have menu items. And the menu items are things like file new. It used to be called file, this menu. It's workspace now. File new, file open, save, and save as. And each of these items, you can create a function, a hook, which you override and implement with the logic for that thing. Now, one of the decisions I've decided to do early on is I'm not having any of the logic actually implemented in the event handlers of the WX widgets components. So here are those hooks, and you can see I'm overriding them. And all these hooks are going to do is directly call functions that are already defined and contain that additional logic. And there's a reason for this. Calling sort of event handlers like this in order to use the logic is actually pretty sloppy practice in my book. They're expecting an event, so you've got to pass in some sort of null event, which then actually might not make any sense in the context of how you're handling that particular GUI event. So I like, firstly, to separate the two. It also allows me to call these from anywhere, and that can be very useful if we end up having some sort of macro functionality or scripting functionality, or we just need to reuse bits of one in the other. That all gets very fiddly when you're dealing specifically with event handlers. Leglugnal. Greetings, hello. Hey, don't turn the Twitch chat into the Discord chat, please. Thank you very much. So let's go and have a look at some of these functions. It's all boring boilerplate stuff, but it's important things too. So as you can see, the file sizes are starting to swell a little bit. Here we go. So handling the event handlers for file new, it simply calls do workspace new. Save and save as, for example, I can reuse that functionality. They both call do workspace save. And we'll have a look at what the workspace is now, because I think that's sort of fundamentally where things started to change a little bit. So we saw in the previous episode the beginnings of the workspace, and we had a single button in the GUI that was doing all of these sort of hardware transactions, which was a poor decision, and that was pointed out to me by almost everybody. So instead now the image asset is responsible for looking after itself for the most part. I've still not worked out how to uniquely identify these image assets across the program, but also defined in the workspace was this workspace class, which is the overall project construction. It's the thing that had the vector of images, which will be used as assets. And I changed everything that was path related to actually start using file system path. It's an awful addition to the C++ language in terms of syntax, but it's a brilliant addition and most necessary addition in terms of functionality. So once you can look past sort of its rather terse sort of nomenclature, is that the right way to say that? You can actually do some pretty powerful things with it. Things like this, for example, path asset dot lexically relative. I mean, come on. It's just an awful way of describing what's happening here. And it's a problem that Windows sort of threw up. What is actually going on here? Does anybody know without looking what path asset dot lexically relative means? I'm willing to bet not very many. Good, yeah, useful feature, but awful implementation. Right. See, that's the thing, right? You sort of look lexically relative. Is it sort of string? It's kind of checking what's the difference between two paths. And there's various types of relativity checking. Doesn't work with different casing. I think it seems to be okay actually. I've not experienced that anyway, and I'm just throwing in random paths. It does seem to be fairly case and sort of slash direction agnostic. What it didn't work, well, the reason I needed to use it here, so I'd love to have the drawing tablet. This would make life much easier. The path that's set up on the system is relative to wherever this editor executable is running. But of course, the project path that you are generating all of these assets for might be somewhere completely different. WX Form Builder actually does a similar model. You can, on the main project settings, properties up here, you can specify the path to where all of the files and anything generated should be relative to, and that should be relative to where your game is. Presumably your game will have a subfolder called assets, and inside that it can load those things. So that allows you to set this path. But there's a problem here. On Windows, you have this rather pesky, awkward thing called a drive letter, which actually really makes a difference between whether a path is considered relative or not. You can't have relative paths to different drives. So you need to make this check to see what happens, and we can demonstrate this. So if I run the application, let's have a look. So if I go down and want to load a new asset, for example, let's go to our assets folder here, and I'm loading this one. It's my test PNG. You can see that the path it's created, it's assets/test PNG. That's what I wanted, a nice relative path to wherever my project path has been set. But if I go to on a different drive, because you can't have relative paths to different drives, I need to find one. Here we go. GUI icons, PNG, transparent, that'll do. Beer. I need the full path, so I need it, and it's good that the file system actually works that thing out. That we're H drive, Humble Bundle, RPG assets, whatever that full path is. So that's the only way I can resolve this on Windows. Not tested any of this on Linux yet, but it ended up being quite an interesting delve into the file system part of the standard library. Just to keep it in mind that you can't. I thought we could have some sort of clever. I thought the root on the file system model, I kind of thought it did a bit more abstraction than it is doing. I thought it would just treat the H like a folder, but it doesn't do that at all. Awkward. What's going on? I once wrote a relative path generator and it was painful. Well, that's silly because you've got it now in standard file system. Wasted your time there, Magetsu. Total waste of time. Those little dotted lines are really neat between the curly brackets. Oh, these little dotted lines. Yeah, kind of got used to them now. I think I didn't like them when they first appeared, but if they're not there now, yeah, maybe I do miss them. They are quite handy because if you do stupid things with cut and paste like that, you start to see you've got errors here. You can begin to quickly work out where you're missing parentheses. Is it parentheses? I don't know. Whatever curly brackets is. Who cares? Shouldn't Windows work without drive letters now? Don't know. Excellent. Good. I'm glad that the jingles. I'm making up for last week because the jingles were very, very quiet. See? There we go. Is the code source somewhere? Not yet, and there's a reason, and I knew this question would come up. Why is this not just immediately available for analysis? I actually have no particular problem with uploading it at all, but what I don't want to upload just yet is one of its major dependencies, which is Pixel Game Engine 3. So I have a personal release schedule on these things. Now, if I released this code, nobody would be able to compile it because it is very thoroughly dependent on all the goodies that are part of Pixel Game Engine 3. So I can certainly release the code for people to look at, perhaps in their own time, and see how these things are put together. But it wouldn't be compilable, and I think people wouldn't be very happy with that. How do you display the little window program on the side? This one here. This is part of Visual Studio's build. Make sure you're not using Visual Studio Code. This is proper Visual Studio. Because I think they both can do it, but Visual Studio, it's in where is it? It's in Tools. Options. Oh, hang on. I think then it's in text editors, is it? Text editor. Oof. Can't remember. There's something called code previewing somewhere. Where is it? Somebody will know. Yeah, Visual. I think VS Code has it by default. It's a good thing now. It is in here somewhere. Documents. I don't know. Projects and solutions. Oh, it's buried in here somewhere. I thought it was under text editor because it's there in like all text now. Does VS have it by default now as well? It might do in the later versions. Maybe it's just not even an option. It's just there all the time. It used to be that you had to turn it on. So now, because you have an account associated with Visual Studio, every time I've upgraded, it's just always pulled the settings through. Oh, there we go. Right, so go down to the language specific that you want. You can show line numbers. I believe it's called navigation bar. Is that right? I think it might be that one. Scroll bars. There we go. Use map mode for vertical scroll bar. There we go. That's where we found it. So it is in there. If you right click on the scroll bar, oh yeah, you can get into it from there as well. Didn't know that. So there we go. Right, so yeah, we're going back to the description of the sort of structure of the data behind the project. So I have a workspace which contains all of the things, and it's the workspace I've decided to have contain things called work objects. And work objects are where the fun begins. So a work object is anything that's going to be editable in the editor. Now I've got some examples here. The settings for the workspace, they're editable. The asset pack that we've seen so far. I might throw in other forms of asset pack too. I've not decided that. Palettes. I'm going to have indexable palettes and non-indexable palettes. I think they're quite an important thing now in game design to make your games look consistent. I'm going to then have something called a layered construction. So this is, naively, you could think of this as like a level. And that level may consist of all sorts of things, like tiled layers of booleans, integers, characters, floats, simple tiles, which are just static images, and dynamic tiles, which I'm thinking are going to be sort of animated things. All of this is up for debate and discussion. And then geometry. I got bored of typing things out. I had enough to start working with. So a work object is something that is editable. And the reason I wanted a work object, if I run things, having to compile. What did we change? Oh, we demonstrated the dotted lines, didn't we? So the reason I wanted these to all be sort of a common object is I want the environment, the editor environment, to be able to talk to all of these objects in a common way. I'm polymorphizing the hell out of my application. Garbage Town, hello. For some reason, changing that bracket in whatever file that was caused a complete recompile. So everything that's in here is fundamentally work objects, and these are going to have sort of sub-objects of themselves. And every work object that you can select will have some sort of viewer, which we can see up here, or which can be dragged around and put wherever. But it will also have its own set of properties. And those properties are going to appear in a property grid here. Now, a property grid in WX Widgets is basically one of these things on the side. They're quite powerful tools, actually, because the property grids allow you to have names and sort of values, but they also allow you to have different types. So you can have property grids here with tick boxes. You can have property grids with different colors and different restrictions on numeric entries, and you can have them all sorts of different data types. So if I select on this panel, the property grid here, where, if I select on here, I can select from a list, and I can go down to the bottom and select custom. All of that's actually handled by the user interface. It's a really powerful way of sanitizing a bulk of user input. And I really want all of these things to be exposed when we're doing editing of these things. So, for example, if I create a level of tiles, it may consist of things like the tile width, how many tiles across. It may consist of things, what's the inter-tile spacing. What is the name of the level. It's just basic level property editing things. At the moment, I don't have anything that's up and running because I've decided to use from my saving stuff video the OLC data file format as the fundamental sort of data storage mechanism for everything in the application. I use it because I'm familiar with it. And so all of my work objects have this public work object load and work object save function. Now, anything that derives from this class has to, as you can see here, it's abstract, has to override the on work object load and object. So these are the sort of the local personal versions of whatever the derived object is. And I only have one derived object at the moment, and it actually has no content at all because that's where I stopped at this point. A static tile source. And I wrote some comments. A source of non-animated tiles, a regular tile map, it's a tile atlas. So this was the idea. It's going to associate with it a particular image ID and then all of the necessary gridding to extract tiles from this object. Not sure if you are penetrating Windows. Oh, that's a different kind of Twitch stream I think you want. Are those just fancy tree views? Yes, they are, but they're tree views with like loads of sanitation on them. You think serialization is stupid and you just want to write C-style structs. Well, that's fine. You can be there all week doing that. You really like my coding style. Well, you are now my new best friend and you're probably in the minority on the internet. Not many people do. So the idea is to have these work objects as sort of the things that end up being serialized. Rather oddly, I decided to make the workspace itself actually a work object because it's something that has properties and it's something that needs to be serializable. So we can have a look at how the workspace was serialized using the special OLC image format. If we have a look at the save function first, there it is. So it's what you expect to do. We specify the path for the project because this is everything that's in the workspace. So the workspace currently only consists of a path and a vector of assets to load. And so that's what it's doing. It creates these properties, assets here, and then it just writes the name and the file name of each asset, just iterating through the vector. Very, very simple. On work object load, it does basically the opposite. It grabs the path from the file and it grabs all of the assets and it creates a vector filled with them. Remember, the assets now kind of look after themselves in terms of interacting with the GPU. When you create a work object, the first thing it does is call this a constructor, and the constructor needs to pass in a particular type. C++ doesn't have sort of any meaningful methods of reflection, but when you're working with this particular pattern, you do need the class to be able to identify what it is when you're constructing it, because later on, when you're reconstructing it, when you're opening the whole project, you need to know, was I a tile map? Is this one a palette? Is this some project settings? Is this an asset collection? And the only way you're going to get that information is to actually interrogate the very basic work object and then reconstruct the subclass as necessary. It's actually it is a pattern. I can't remember what the pattern's called, but it's a very typical pattern for having lots of derived objects with a common base class. Morris, hello, nice to see you there. Rosso, hello. Who else have we got? Oh, something went ping. What went ping? Oh, thank you for the follow. Was it the strategy pattern? No, I don't think it's the strategy pattern. Yes, it's been a while, Morris. I've missed your opinionated banter. Let's leave it like that. Basically, okay, we have this work object, and it's fundamentally responsible for looking after itself in terms of serialization and deserialization. I made a whole video about exactly this pattern called saving stuff, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. I'm trying to write comments in all of this as I go. I know I don't particularly like comments, but because I'm now sort of more sporadically working on things, I have found I'm forgetting certain bits of my own programs. Right. So that means what was left? We go to the mainframe. How are we actually constructing a workspace? I don't think we're doing anything special at the moment. We'll just double check. There's nothing important to show. No, not yet anyway. This will get a bit more involved, this particular function. So this is when we do open a workspace. And see, for example, I immediately want to check if the workspace needs to be closed when you open a new one. So I don't want to do that by triggering a fake event in the system. I'm just going to call the function directly. So there's a lot to be said for separate. You do end up with all of these do functions, do this, do that, all over your code. But that separation, I think, is a really powerful way to really consider reuse in a simplistic way in these GUI applications. So I think tonight what I wanted to start work on was a new work object, which is a tile source. So we might actually start doing some coding. We're about halfway through. That's good. What is OLC Edit 2D? It's just the namespace for this this whole application. Funny, Morris. I think we all think that way. Are properties represented as standard variant key value pairs? No, they're not. Even though that particular pattern does exist, I don't like sort of walking along those sort of variant things. There's literally no need for it. I see these patterns and I think there's so much verbosity in actually trying to implement them, but fundamentally the human readable text file at the end of it just doesn't represent that at all. You have real numbers, natural numbers, and strings. So that's all I have as well. I created some convenient indexing utility so I could have collections of numbers and collections of strings and mixtures of strings and numbers. So through that, you can pretty much define anything. But I make a fundamental assumption that in a C++ program, if you're reading from a file, you should know what you're reading from the file. Not, oh, well, it might be this type in certain situations and it might be this other type in another. You know, if you need sort of dynamic types like that all over the place, I think you've probably got a bit of a design flaw somewhere. You know, C++ is not designed to be sort of so dynamically typed. At least I think so. Yeah, Voxel, by the way, everybody, if you didn't know, Voxel is a Rust programmer. So think of that what you will. Right. So where did we get? What did I say we were going to do? Tool properties, nothing in there. I think we've caught up with sort of the major changes. Let's say there's a lot actually gone into things like the asset manager. Just sort of sanitizing that and making it pretty and making it so it's reliable and doesn't crash. And also, no, at the moment, there's no perceivable memory leaks in the application either. So it's just making sure everything's cleaning up after itself. I have been debating whether or not I should be using weak pointer the way that I am. I quite like weak pointer as an idea. Maybe I should make a video about specifically weak pointer and shared pointers. I like the idea that with a, let's for example here, I like the idea that GUI should be fluid, right? So you should be able to change things in one window and it appears in some other window that's related to it entirely automatically. You shouldn't require the user to go and make changes in multiple places. So one way of doing that is you have an object shared across all of these windows. And a nice way to share an object now, of course, is shared pointer. And weak pointer allows you to sort of specify a shared pointer without taking ownership of it until you need to. And I quite like that as a concept. So rather than for example, if this GUI asset manager here took ownership of a specific shared pointer, that shared pointer is then owned throughout the entire duration of this object existing. That might be a bit problematic. So I quite like the idea of just grabbing a little bit of ownership whenever you need it. And it does it in a reasonably safe way too. So this if auto workspace here allows me to call this lock function on what is a standard weak pointer. And that will sort of turn the object into a shared pointer for the duration of this if. And it'll only do that if that object actually exists somewhere. So there's a nice sort of sanity check to say, well, as long as this object isn't null, yeah, you can access it for the time being. It's not necessarily thread safe, and I'm not implying that that's the case at all, but just for a conceptual way of making sure that your functions don't crash because somewhere else you've actually deleted that object. I quite like it. I guess it's what's the? I thought at first when I was thinking about how would I describe this, it's kind of like a raw pointer having a value, meaning it's got an address in memory, and it also has existence because it's not null. So there's a duality to the meaning of a raw pointer, but it's not quite the same in this instance. JavaScript is an awful mess. Oh, I'm not getting involved in that one. No. It's too easy to get cancelled these days. You'd like a video specifically on shared pointers and weak pointers. Okay, well, I certainly think I'll add that one to the list. I think there's a good pattern there. I like it as a tool. I have no problem with pointers, by the way. I actually abuse pointers probably a bit too much. Right, so I wanted to create a source. It would be much easier if I had my working drawing pad today. It's a shame that it's not working. Well, I wanted to basically make a tile atlas. That's what was it. And that's going to extend from where I actually started doing this somewhere. Where did I start writing this? Work object. Here we go. A static tile source. And the idea is we want to create one of these objects, make it somehow visible on the screen, and I wanted to be able to draw a grid over that object to make sure that we can then partition the tiles appropriately. Let's see what I mean. Excuse me. So if I launch the application again, let's load an asset. Let's go to here. Oh, hang on. No, I don't want to load that. I just want to actually load an asset. No. Workspace, new. There we go. Add new asset. And we'll pick... we'll pick this one. So it's very clear that all of the assets on this image are some sort of same-sized tile. That's the bug. That's the bug. Right, excellent. This is the bug. This is the bug that in the last episode that we couldn't find. I couldn't make it happen. So, what is it looking? List control. Item 0 and item is less than it failed. See how I tried to replicate it last time. I scrolled the window down and it wouldn't do it. And I think it's a little bug in WX widgets. Yeah. Interesting. There we go. Let's just have a quick look around here because I can't always make it happen. It only happens certain times. So what's called that? On Paint is called the window, the list to redraw. Yeah, you see, it's interesting. It's there as part of the drawing command, so it's not actually any of my code. Here, you see, it's really buried. So it's trying to draw the contents of lists that aren't there. Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll try and be a bit more careful. Now I've sort of managed to generate it, but it doesn't always happen, and that's what's a bit puzzling about it. Right, add an asset. So I want to add the tile map. There we go. So all of these are some sort of sub-selectable tile. The trouble is I can't see how many pixels across it is at the moment. Clearly the first sensible asset we can use is offset into the stripe. Ribul has subscribed. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Excitement over a bug. Yes, there is. All right, Rosso. Sorry, I didn't say. I was too excited with the bug. Yes, the bug. See, people remember the bug. Yeah, okay. If it's too loud, the desktop audio, then I'll work out a way of turning it up. Just get over it. So yeah, so I wanted to sort of have some properties which allow me to define any kind of grid over this image. Now, some of the tile maps that are created out there, it depends on the artist, and maybe sometimes the artists don't always think about the programmer when they're creating. Dare I say such a thing? They might not actually think about the programmer. So sometimes they don't even space them evenly amongst tiles. So, something went ping. Oh, first time chat. Like what? Good. Jump scare. Excellent. Good on, please. Stop subscribing. My speakers are clipping. I didn't realise it would be so loud. The sub notice made my sub bounce. Well, that's what it should do, right? If you're on Linux, yeah, okay. All right, Dad. Right. So I've completely lost my train of thought. So yes, basically I want to be able to define a grid that sits over this image, and we can then use that grid as the basis of extracting individual tiles. And so I'm hoping by this time next week I'll have the very rudimentary elements of putting a tile map down. Right. Now, the thing is, I'm sort of now definitely in the realms of making a lot of this up as we go along. I've got this far thinking, well, this sounds really clever and I like the idea of it, but how do I actually link any of this information to anything I can see on screen? I've not thought this bit through. And part of the problem is the following. Hang on, let me just see. Why has my phone gone ping? Okay. Excuse me, it's probably just the Prime Minister. No, it wasn't the Prime Minister. So part of the problem is I am serializing my classes, and I want my classes to have local data types like this. I want them to all be sort of accessible to the code that matters. So the static tile source will do things with this information in order to generate the stuff that I need. But I'm serializing it in my data file way, and I want to be able to get these settings, these here, into a property grid somehow. So I need a static tile source view, sort of collaborative component, a sister component as it were, that converts this into WX widgets speak. And I've not really decided where to put that yet, because WX widgets doesn't natively understand what an OLC VI2D is. It doesn't understand, in fact, it doesn't even understand really what a standard string is. So I need some sort of intermediate level. And I didn't want to get then sort of bogged down into, well, for every static tile source, I need views, I need serialization components, I need all this additional fluff. So I've not really quite worked out how I'm going to handle that yet. It may actually be there's not that much to handle, because once you've got through the basic data types like this, then you've got a few colors and a few other things. Maybe it is just worth modifying the property grid control with an override to actually handle these additional property grid item types. It's Prime Minister code for JX10. This time next week we will be Tilioners. Excellent. Oh, hey, Diego. Nice one. Nice to see you. Oh, yeah. Actually, good point, Magetsup. There we go. Hopefully you'll do a better job than Alexio did. Yeah, there we are. How long are you streaming for today? They're only an hour long, these code zones-ish. Depends how we end when we get there. So we've not really done much coding yet. But I wanted to get all this boring stuff out the way. It's important. And today I really wanted to get the drawing pad out and sketch out sort of all of this hierarchy of how things are going to work. And it's a bit more verbal than before. So I've got my static tile source. It's got some way of saving and loading, but I'm not there yet. What we now need is a GUI component to create a static tile source. And I guess we just need to get stuck into VX Form Builder. So this will be a view, and it's the first view that we've really made. And I guess it's going to have its properties down here, but I guess it just becomes a bit like an image view, but with a grid on it. So let's create a new panel component. And we'll label this panel component a static tile source view base. Always got to have that base. Now, those of you who have missed previous episodes, the reason you sort of do base classes in here is you always override these classes in your code. And so I'll override it with just static tile source view. And there's not really going to be a great deal of things in here. In fact, arguably, I don't need to do this at all in WX Form Builder. I'm just hedging my bets that later on, maybe there are things I'll actually want to add to this. In fact, I can already start to think of some things like the properties that we've already got in our image asset selection view. So things like fitting the view to the whole screen, viewing transformation. Maybe I actually do want this as a bit of a common control for everything that's image related. Perhaps that's something I need to elevate in my actual image view control. In fact, probably that makes a lot of sense now, thinking about doing it that way. So it doesn't do very much at the moment, but it just needs to exist, and we'll start to modify it and see if we can get it to load up the view. I'll have to hard code some properties in to begin with, and then we need to look at actually creating a renderer for this, which I guess is what we're doing here. So am I doing this in the wrong place? Maybe I am. Maybe I am. Maybe thinking about this a bit more, maybe if we're going to be doing stuff with grids, what I need is actually just a grid view with an image behind it. Perhaps that's actually a more important thing to have. And the good thing about that is I kind of have one already made. We just need to look at some of the code for it. So if I look at my graphics panel, I think it's nav panel. So when I was debugging all of this in the first place, creating some of the basic technology to look at images, I created some WX Widgets components that basically house the Pixel game engine. One of them was this nav panel, and that allows me to basically do a transform view, panning and zooming around the image. But I used this as a bit of a testing ground for all sorts of things. And so there's loads of like junk code in here, which just never gets called. So this return function here just stops any sort of this debug custom rendering from happening. But one of the things that this debug custom rendering did was actually draw grids and cursors. So I'm thinking I need a modified image view that actually has the facility to draw a grid on top of it. Now, an image view is a nav panel, is a graphics panel. So yeah, I think I want something like gridded image view, or image view with grid, or something like that. And then I can take this code out of my debug environment here and put it into the post render function. Yeah, because that makes sense, because I think every time you're going to have a grid, you're probably also going to be selecting things and doing things with that grid. Interesting. A bit of a design decision to make here. Oh, hang on. Lots of chats going on here. Should I create some sub and following? So those that don't know, Bixie has very kindly offered to help work on a bit of a theme tune for the opening of the CodeZone. And we've been batting forth a few ideas. One of them would definitely have got me in jail, so we've rejected that one. And it's coming together, and I think it's going to sound pretty cool. I think I might add at some point. We need to basically add some of the things that make it a bit sort of one lone codery, but at the moment it's got a really good vibe to it. So thanks to Bixie for helping me out there. So one of the things Bixie seems to be particularly good at is actually all of the production and the drums and the layering and things, and I'm not very good at that. Voxel's getting a Mackie. Speaking of drawing pads, I've been consuming copious amounts of Bob Ross painting videos. That's great. Are you painting as you follow along? That's what you're supposed to do. Diego, you started streaming, so to hop in. Currently writing tests, so you make the stream less boring. You in the way? I'm in the way. Okay. We want to reproduce the WX widgets in OLC. No, not really. Other way around, we're actually using the Pixel Game Engine in WX Widgets because the Pixel Game Engine 3 can be embeddable into basically any GUI environment. Form Builder is awesome. It is. Okay, I'm catching up. Ooh, a theme tune. Yes. Well, I thought it'd be good to have a bit of just a 20-ish second intro to these things, mainly because I don't know, does Twitch play an ad at the start of these things? I don't know. Right, so I think I want to have a special. So we've got a nav panel, and from that we have a viewer image. So the viewer image here, so it extends a navigable panel, and basically just displays a image on the screen that you can drag and drop and move around. I wonder if what I really should have here is, yeah, I should derive from this. What do you think? Should I derive from image viewer something that then allows me to put grid controls and grid navigation, or should I create a gridded image viewer that derives from navigable panel? Because really the contents of this is almost nothing. Interesting decision. Yeah, before you say, okay, that's what I'm thinking. I don't. How long are those ads? Because I try to just sort of chat for a bit before I get stuck in with any real detail. Yeah, it'd be useful if you could let me know. I think, this is like a critical design decision we need to make here. Should we inherit from this one, or should we duplicate and inherit from this one? I don't know. Maybe a little door. I don't know. I think I like the fact that image viewer is just really the static and simple thing. I've got a feeling that a gridded image viewer is really sort of going to be the core and crux of almost everything that we're rendering. I think it's too important to control to have derived from this. This sort of implies it does one thing and one thing only. So I think I want a more enhanced panel, which is a panel with grid overlay and cursor selection and all of that sort of thing. In fact, that actually feels better to me as a more powerful control, because a lot of things are going to end up being drawn in one window. So at the moment we're thinking of just a static image to simply pick tiles from, but in reality for the level editor I'm going to need multiple layers, I'm going to have different kind of rendering all going on in the same window. So I think what we could do is the base control to handle all of that interactive navigation, which is then probably derived from into a far more complicated mega renderer, one big monolithic rendering tool. Yeah, I've got a feeling that in my head that's kind of where it's going. Tepir, hello. Mags is not a mod. Mags is the mod. It's certainly one of the first. Hello. Oh, maybe even F mod. Okay, it's all sorts of lots of in jokes going on. I don't have time for such shenanigans. Yeah, okay. I think that's the. So we've made a decision, right? So you know what? You wanted to see some code. Let's actually stick that bit in. We've made a decision that we're going for, and we get to name this class. What should we call this class? So I want to call it something that reflects the idea that it is a interactive grid image. Need a name for that. Interactive grid. I'm not calling it Fmod. So I'm going to call it, we've got image view. I think this is now interactive grid view. Interactive, what does that really mean? I think it means grid view with cursor stuff. I'm not going to call grid image viewer. Grid image viewer. Grid image viewer. It's just more than just views an image. You see, it's sort of it's going to be a gridded renderer, but yeah, view. View is fine. Grid view with grid cursor view, interactive grid view. I don't know. Pannable. That's what an image view does already. It does the panning. I taught you bitwise operations. Oh, excellent. Well, that's good to know. Hope you're not abusing them. Grid viewer image interactable renderer with cursors. Okay. That's what we'll call the class. But in my language here, this is actually a fundamental GUI component. So I'm going to just forget what I'm putting in here. This will actually change. So I'm going to call that just grid view, which is the sort of the file names it's going to create. That's good. And then I want to take that bit because we're going to have that bit. And where's my navigable nav panel? There we are. Let's go up here because I'm going to pinch. Yeah, I'm going to pinch that bit. Ooh. There's all sorts going on there. I'm going to have to untangle, I think. I'm going to get rid of you. And we're going to have a class in here. So this is actually in a namespace. All of this might change. I'm not that sort of sure where I'm going with a lot of the namespace. The problem with sort of developing all this organically. I'm going to potentially then have in this namespace something like that, which is going to inherit from GUI navigable panel, which I guess I need to include up here. So that can become hashpanel.h. There we are. Which has already got you. It's already got you. Okay, good. Yeah, it's a bit long, this name. I'll say that. Some sensible naming. Suddenly we're writing Java. Oh dear. Crowdsourced class names. What could possibly go wrong? It's a good thing to think about doing, isn't it? Hello, Moon. Finally, I've caught who you are. Okay. How about gridded image viewer? It's more than just an image viewer. That's the thing, though, Speedy. Hard to forget once memorized. Grid viewer, interactable renderer with cursor. Right. I imagine it's going to end up just being grid view. But shouldn't it just have one responsibility? No, well, that's why we're going to have multiple inheritance. Right? Multiple inheritance is like the best thing ever. Most languages try to get rid of it. I think you should have more of it. Yeah, you're right, Morris. We've kind of got like namespaces and things going on now. We've got massive class names. I just got here at the end again. Unfortunately, yeah, we're not far off, I'm afraid. Okay, let's be sensible. I think this is just going to simply be grid view. Because this is actually going to be such a fundamental component. I've got a feeling we'll actually probably have a fair few things derived from this. So the intention, one of the things I've started doing with my coding is I've been putting an intention comment. Why was I thinking along this lines? So a grid view is going to be the base for all things selectable in my editor. This is actually, I probably should have discussed this before we came. One of the things I quite like about editors, like things like Visio and some of the CAD packages that I use, and I've actually talked about this on the channel as well, and built editors that work in this way. I like things that snap to grids. I like the fact that you can get very consistent artwork together when you can snap vectors and points to grids. Tiles are obviously a grid. 2D games, I quite like gridded aesthetics. Big organic 2D games, they're really just grids, but with the grids hidden between wavy lines. grids are really important for structuring things in a 2D world. And basically, my editor is always going to have things aligned to grids. Now, the grids may change their relationship to each other to give you some sort of offsets, but fundamentally, it is going to be a gridded editor. And so I think this is really going to be the part that does everything. And one of the things I'll need to create is my main editor window. How do I put all of these work objects that are layers within this window? They're not tools in themselves, they're just data components that are stored within this grid view. So the grid view will render some background, and then it will interrogate all of its child objects, all of these layers, to render themselves effectively, which may also be some sort of grid view, which I guess implies that the nature of this grid view needs some customizable data set, and that might be something to think about for next time. I'm hoping by next time I'll have some very basic sort of editing capability drawn up, because that's the point where you start to think, how does the user experience come together? And we've talked about other things that I wanted to experiment with in this setup, such as integrated scripting languages and undo features. And we're just not there yet. I still need to sort of plow through all of this really bit of boilerplate. But at the moment, there's nothing really that interactive. So to try and keep my own enthusiasm and the momentum up, I'm trying to get to the point where I can edit something as fast as possible. We may completely refactor it, we may completely rethink it, but it just means that the project starts to come alive. And we can start generating assets and playing with it, and that's half the fun. If you can sit there playing with your own tools that you've developed, then you're thinking about new ideas and how do they work and what's the user experience like. And so that's my personal style of development. I like it to be this organic, chaotic mess, and then sort of prune it all back into what works and what didn't. So until then, oh, could you show Tepper what you're working on? Okay. Let's have a look then. If it's going to compile, if it doesn't compile, I'll just run the last build. I've got a feeling we've got files all over the place. So yeah, a lot to sort of get to that major first hurdle of placing our first tile. I'm building effectively a two-dimensional editor. Say this works, but no. I'm going to open up a workspace I've already got, workspaces. This is actually a big workspace with all sorts of assets. And what we've been working on primarily so far is sort of the asset management of things in the background, and making sure that we've got very fast and fluid rendering of everything that's going on. And the rendering is, it's very flexible and fluid with things. So if we've got sort of my mega sprite, which is this one. Let's go back. There we are. It's a tool for collating anything that can be edited in 2D. And I'm trying to think of a framework which is in such a way abstract that it becomes quite modular and easy to add in other things. But that means having to think about the boilerplate, and that's really at the stage I'm at the moment. How does that really boring behind the scenes sort of data collection work before we can get into the fun stuff about actually putting in the editing tools themselves? So we're having some thinking about it here. Do you know how you might avoid accessing animations? What's going on here? Oh, I don't know. I'll leave it at that. Right. That is it. Thank you very much for this week's Code Zone. I was going to say, Diego, if you were streaming, we could have sent everybody your way, but nobody seems to be streaming at the moment. So I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'll see you at 8:30 again next week. Take care, everybody.